My name is Isabella Hayes. I'm 34, a homemaker living in a beautiful house in Austin, Texas, with my husband Daniel, a charming pharmaceutical sales director. From the outside, my life looked perfect, but everything changed when I discovered his secret. After years of infertility and inheriting my parents' fortune, Daniel grew distant. On a road trip to rekindle our love, a stranger warned me to run. I later learned Daniel already had a wife and kids elsewhere. He planned to fake my mental illness and take everything I owned, but I fought back. Now he's in prison, and I've started a new life by the sea, stronger than ever. My name is Isabella Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a pristine, white-roofed house nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. From the outside looking in, anyone would think I'm living the kind of life people only see in glossy lifestyle magazines, the ones with headlines about simple elegance and achieving effortless perfection. Our house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with tall oak trees, whose ancient branches arch overhead like silent guardians. In autumn, their leaves turn the color of rust and gold, falling in slow spirals onto the driveway until it looks like a painter's canvas, strewn with warm, earthy strokes. The front yard is my pride and joy, a rose garden that blooms almost all year round, filling the breeze with the delicate sweetness of pink ivory and deep crimson petals. Sometimes I catch neighbors slowing their cars just to gaze at the roses swaying in the morning light, and a small flicker of pride burns in my chest. White trellises curl gracefully around the porch, framing the house like lace. Thomas had a wooden swing installed for me when we first moved in. He painted it pale cream to match the porch railings. It creaks softly whenever I sit there with my morning tea, the porcelain cup warm between my palms as I watch the world awaken. Birds flit between branches, squirrels chase each other up trunks, and a faint lavender dawn seeps through the horizon. In those moments, everything feels calm, still, almost beautiful. My husband, Thomas Hayes, is 38. He's the sales director for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in Texas. Tall, with neatly combed chestnut brown hair, a clean-shaven jawline, and a smile that radiates warmth and effortless charm, the kind of man who knows exactly what to say to make anyone feel seen. At dinner parties, he becomes the gravity in the room. Men want his respect, women want his attention. And when he laughs, throwing his head back just slightly, people laugh with him as if their joy is tethered to his approval. For over 10 years, I've proudly devoted myself to being a full-time homemaker. I wake up before dawn to prepare his breakfast eggs, scrambled just the way he likes 2 slices of toasted rye bread with a thin spread of butter and a steaming mug of strong black coffee. I iron his shirts until every crease is razor-sharp polish, his shoes until they gleam beneath the hallway light, and watch him leave each morning in his tailored charcoal suit and leather briefcase. The sound of his car engine fading down the street is always followed by a soft, hollow silence, leaving me alone in a house that feels like it's waiting to be filled with something. Laughter, conversation, life. From the outside, everything about my life looks perfect. The fresh-cut flowers in vases replaced every Sunday morning. The meticulously organized pantry with matching labeled glass jars lined up like obedient soldiers. The spotless marble kitchen counters wiped down twice a day until they reflect the pendant lights overhead. The living room that smells faintly of rose and bergamot candle wax, mingled with the clean linen scent of freshly washed curtains swaying in the breeze. Whenever friends visit, they comment on how lucky I am. Isabella, you're living the dream, they say, as they sip herbal tea from delicate cups with gold rims. A beautiful home, a handsome, successful husband who clearly adores you. What more could anyone want? I always smile politely, tucking stray hair behind my ear, and offer them freshly baked scones with strawberry jam I made the day before. But inside there's a small voice that whispers a question I never say out loud. If everything is so perfect, why do I sometimes feel like a guest in my own life? At night, after loading the dishwasher and wiping down the counters until they shine like pale moonstone, I stand by the kitchen window. Outside, the garden is bathed in silver light roses, closed tight for the night, their beauty hidden in the darkness. I press my palm against the cool glass and stare at the faint silhouette of my reflection. A woman with neat hair pinned back a clean apron, tied snug around her waist, and a practiced smile on lips that have forgotten what it feels like to curl from genuine laughter. People think I have it all. A beautiful house, a loving, successful husband, a life free from worry. But sometimes in the quietness of dawn or the hushed darkness before sleep, I can feel it a hollow ache deep inside my chest. It pulses softly beneath the surface of my perfect life like a secret I don't have the courage to name. Something is missing. Something is sleeping inside me waiting to awaken. And in that darkness, in that silent space between who I am and who I could have been, I wonder if one day the hollow will echo so loudly, it will finally swallow me whole. When Thomas and I first got married, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. We met at a charity gala hosted by one of his company's major partners. I had tagged along with a friend who worked in event management, never imagining that stepping into that hall, lit by crystal chandeliers and filled with the soft hum of polite conversation, would change the course of my life forever. Thomas stood out among the men in tailored suits that evening. He wasn't the tallest or the broadest, but there was something magnetic about the calm confidence in his posture, the way his laughter seemed to put everyone around him at ease. When he first spoke to me, leaning down slightly to hear my name over the clinking glasses and low music, his eyes locked on mine with such focused warmth that for a moment I forgot the noise, the people, the whole world around us. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. It was a Sunday morning in late spring. The roses in the garden behind my apartment building were just beginning to bloom, small pink buds dotting the hedges like secrets waiting to unfold. He brought me breakfast in bed, croissants, fresh berries, and a small glass jar of peach jam with a handwritten label that read, "Forever, if you say yes." I remember thinking, this is it. This is the life I always dreamed of. We married 6 months later in a small chapel on the outskirts of Austin, surrounded by family and friends. I wore an ivory lace gown with pearl buttons down the back, and Thomas couldn't stop smiling as I walked down the aisle. People said they'd never seen a groom look so completely in love. I believed them. In those first few years, I woke up every morning feeling grateful. I was a wife, a homemaker, and soon I hoped a mother. We talked about children constantly, back then named school districts, whether to paint the nursery pale yellow or mint green. Thomas would wrap his arms around me from behind while I cooked dinner, resting his chin on my shoulder and whispering, "Our home won't be complete until it's filled with tiny feet running down these halls." At first, it was exciting. Every month felt like a new beginning, a fresh chance. I tracked my cycle's meticulously marked days on the calendar with small, hopeful hearts. I read articles about increasing fertility, started taking prenatal vitamins, switched to herbal teas. Each time my period arrived, a wave of disappointment would wash over me, but I'd brush it aside with optimism. Next month will be the month. It has to be. But the months began to stack up one on top of another, like silent bricks building a wall between hope and reality. After a year, I made my first appointment at the fertility clinic. The waiting room was painted in soft pastel colors with framed photographs of smiling babies lining the walls. Each photo felt like a silent promise. Look, it worked for them. It can work for you too. Thomas came with me to the first consultation. He squeezed my hand as the nurse drew my blood, kissed my forehead, before the ultrasound technician started her scan. When the doctor came in with the results speaking in careful, measured words about hormone levels, egg counts, and possible interventions, Thomas listened with an attentiveness that made me feel safe. We started with medication, then intrauterine insemination. When those failed, we moved to IVF. I remember the first round of IVF clearly. The nightly injections, each prick of the needle burning beneath my skin. The bloating that made my body feel like it wasn't mine anymore. The bruises that bloomed on my stomach like dark, spreading violets. Thomas would prepare the injections, flicking the syringe to remove air bubbles before handing it to me. He tried to keep things light, joking, "Maybe you'll develop superpowers from all this hormone juice." I'd force a smile, but inside fear and hope twisted together into something unrecognizable. The day they transferred the embryo, I lay on the clinic bed staring at the ceiling tiles. The doctor spoke softly, telling me to relax, but my heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her words. Thomas held my hand, his thumb rubbing small circles over my knuckles. As we left the clinic, he wrapped his arm around my shoulders and whispered, "This is it, Bella. I know it." For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of breathless anticipation. Every twinge in my lower abdomen, every wave of fatigue, every heightened sense of smell felt like a sign that life was blooming inside me. But the blood test came back negative. I remember the nurse's voice on the phone. Calm, sympathetic, practiced. "I'm so sorry, Isabella." It didn't take this time. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table staring at the small vase of fresh daisies I had picked from the garden that morning. Their white petals blurred as tears filled my eyes and spilled onto my cheeks one after another in silent surrender. Thomas came home early that day. He hugged me tightly, letting me sob against his chest until my throat felt raw. That evening, he ordered takeout from my favorite Thai place and put on a comedy we had watched on our first date. He made me peppermint tea and tucked a blanket around my shoulders on the couch. "We'll try again," he said, kissing the top of my head. "As long as I have you, that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But over the next 4 years, each attempt ended in failure. Each doctor's visit ended in vague platitudes about age, about chance, about how sometimes there are no explanations, no matter how advanced medical science becomes. I tried everything. Acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicine that stained my teeth a yellowish brown, yoga, and meditation. Dietary changes, cutting out dairy, then gluten, then caffeine. I woke up at dawn to blend kale and ginger smoothies that made me gag, thinking, maybe this will be the thing that changes everything. But month after month, my body betrayed me. The bathroom floor saw the worst of my grief. Each time my period came, I'd sit on the cold tiles, knees pulled to my chest, tears falling onto the thin cotton of my pajamas. I learned to cry silently so Thomas wouldn't hear from the next room. In the beginning, he was endlessly supportive. He held me after each failed attempt, whispering that I was enough, that he loved me no matter what. But as the years passed, something shifted. He stopped coming to every appointment. He no longer asked about my cycle, no longer browsed baby name lists with me over dinner. Sometimes I'd catch him standing by the window looking out at the street below his eyes, following the neighborhood children as they played tag on the sidewalk. His face would soften with an unspoken sadness, and in that moment, I felt a quiet guilt, so sharp, it almost took my breath away. The last doctor we saw was an older woman with gentle eyes. After reviewing my file for a long moment, she looked up and said softly, "Isabella, you've done everything you can. Sometimes it's simply not meant to be. This is in the hands of fate now." Her words felt like a final blow. Fate. as if everything we had poured our hope money and hearts into was just a game being played out by something invisible and cruel. When we left the clinic that day, Thomas didn't say a word on the drive home. I stared out the window at the blurred shapes of passing trees and wondered if it was my fault that fate had decided to remain silent. That evening after dinner, I found him standing alone in the backyard staring up at the moon. I walked out to join him, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind. He placed his hands over mine but didn't say anything. The moonlight cast a pale glow over his face, and for a fleeting moment he looked like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. We went to bed in silence that night. I lay awake for hours listening to his steady breathing beside me, wondering if he was dreaming of a life with children, and if in those dreams I was still part of it. My parents always seemed timeless to me. My father, Richard Evans, was a tall man with a quiet dignity. He ran a small real estate company he built from scratch, waking before dawn every day to check property listings and answer tenant emails before breakfast. My mother, Margaret, was the warmth of our home, soft brown curls always pinned back loosely, flour on her cheeks as she baked pies every Sunday morning. She'd hum old hymns while she worked, filling the kitchen with a kind of gentle peace that felt unbreakable. They lived in an old brick house just 20 minutes from ours. Most Sundays, Thomas and I would drive over after church. My father would sit at the head of the oak dining table, reading the paper, while my mother poured us tea in her delicate china cups, faded roses swirling around the rim. Even after Thomas and I married, I never stopped feeling like their little girl whenever I walked through their front door. Then one autumn morning, everything changed. I was folding laundry when my phone rang. It was the hospital. My father had collapsed at work. A stroke, they said. Massive. By the time I arrived, his eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and labored under the fluorescent lights. My mother sat beside his bed, gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't say a word as I entered, just looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I remember sitting on the cold vinyl chair beside her, resting my head against her shoulder like I used to as a child. His heart stopped at dawn the next day, just as the sun rose outside the narrow hospital window. We buried him under a tall oak tree at Greenlawn Cemetery, the wind cold against my cheeks as I watched the casket lower into the earth. My mother clung to my arm so tightly, I thought her frail fingers might bruise my skin. She kept whispering, "What will I do without him? Bella, what will I do?" 3 months later, I lost her too. It happened quietly. She'd been sick on and off for years. Arthritis, high blood pressure, a stubborn cough she blamed on the Texas humidity. After my father died, she seemed to wither from the inside out. She stopped baking. The humming ceased. Her eyes, once full of spark and warmth, turned dull and far away. One morning, her neighbor found her slumped on the kitchen floor, still wearing her floral nightgown, a cold cup of tea sitting untouched on the table. The doctor said her heart had simply given up. I buried her beside my father under that same oak tree, the winter wind biting through my black wool coat as the pastor spoke prayers of release and peace. Thomas stood silently next to me, his gloved hand wrapped around mine, his face solemn but unreadable. After the funeral, I walked through their empty house alone. The faint scent of lavender and old books clung to the curtains. Her teacup still sat by the window where she always watched the birds gather in the mornings. In their bedroom, my father's reading glasses lay neatly folded on his nightstand, as if he'd only stepped out for a moment. I sat on the edge of their bed, the faded quilt sagging under my weight, and cried until my throat burned. I thought grief would be heavy like a stone pressing down on my chest, but in those days it felt more like a hollow ache, an emptiness so vast it threatened to swallow me whole. There was no one left who remembered me as a child, no one left who called me by the silly nicknames only parents create. A week after my mother's funeral, their lawyer called. I sat in his office, the smell of old carpet and coffee clinging to the air as he explained the terms of their will. They left everything to me. The small real estate company my father built, several rental apartments spread across Austin, savings accounts I hadn't even known existed. My father had always been careful with money, and my mother was the type to reuse tea bags to avoid waste. They never lived lavishly, but they built a quiet wealth over the decades, brick by brick, saving for a future they never got to see. I left the lawyer's office that afternoon, clutching a thick folder of documents against my chest, feeling numb. Thomas drove us home in silence, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel the way they did when he was lost in thought. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally spoke. "Bella, do you realize what this means for us?" I looked at him confused. My eyes were swollen from crying, my head still aching with grief. "What do you mean?" He smiled then, a slow, almost reverent smile. "It means we can finally have the life we've always dreamed of." In the months that followed, everything changed. We sold our old house and moved into a new one, a sprawling 2-story home with tall white columns and a grand spiral staircase in the foyer. Thomas bought a brand new SUV with leather seats that smelled like money and power. We vacationed twice a year, sipping cocktails on the beaches of Florida, dining at rooftop restaurants in California with panoramic ocean views. Friends commented on our photos. "You two are goals. Living the dream life, Isabella, you're so lucky to have him." And I'd smile in every picture, wearing wide-brimmed sun hats and flowy dresses, my hair curling perfectly in the sea breeze. From the outside, our life looked shinier than ever before. But in quiet moments, I began to notice small things I couldn't quite name. The way Thomas's gaze would linger around the house, not at me, but at the polished marble countertops, the chandelier above the dining table, the imported Persian rug in the living room. Like he was taking stock, measuring everything in silent calculations. Sometimes I'd catch a fleeting expression on his face, a flicker of something dark before his easy smile returned. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Grief makes people paranoid, doesn't it? I buried myself in paperwork, learning the ropes of the small real estate company my father left behind. But late at night, lying beside Thomas in our king-sized bed, I would stare at the shadows on the ceiling, a faint unease curling in my chest like a weed pushing through cracks in concrete. People still told me how perfect my life was. They envied our glamorous check-in photos, the champagne toasts at expensive wine bars, the manicured roses blooming outside our front porch. But they didn't see the nights I lay awake listening to Thomas's breathing, wondering if love was still enough, or if something else had quietly begun to replace it. In the first few months after we moved into the new house, Thomas seemed happy. He'd walk through each room with an almost childlike delight, trailing his fingers along the marble countertops, pausing to admire the intricate molding on the ceilings. Every evening he poured us glasses of wine to celebrate new beginnings, as he called them, toasting to the life my parents' inheritance had built for us. But as the seasons changed, so did he. At first it was small things. He started coming home later. Before, he would always call if he was running behind his voice, apologetic and warm. But now evenings would slip away without a word from him. I'd sit in the dining room staring at the flickering candle in the center of the table, the food growing cold as the grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. When he finally came home, his hair would be slightly mussed, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He would kiss me absent-mindedly on the cheek and mutter, "Sorry, long day at work," before heading upstairs to shower. At first, I believed him. Of course I did. He was a sales director after all, constantly juggling clients and meetings. But over time, the excuses became so frequent, so rehearsed, that they began to sound hollow. Then there was his phone. Thomas used to leave it charging on the kitchen counter every evening, scrolling casually as we watched TV together. But now it was always with him. Even when he went to the bathroom or stepped out onto the balcony for air, he kept it in his pocket. If it rang, he'd glance at the screen and step away to answer it in hushed tones, his voice low and clipped the way he spoke when closing delicate business deals. One evening, I walked out onto the balcony to ask if he wanted dessert. He was standing there with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, the golden porch light casting long shadows across his shoulders. "Don't worry, everything's almost ready. Just a little longer." His voice was softer than usual, almost intimate. Before I could say anything, he turned sharply, ending the call with a forced laugh. "Hey, Bella." "You startled me. That was a client. Big deal closing tomorrow." His smile didn't reach his eyes. For the rest of the evening, he was unusually quiet, sipping his whiskey without looking at me. I tried to brush it aside. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the unease in my stomach coiled tighter with each passing day. Another thing changed the credit card statements. Thomas and I always managed our finances together. Every month he'd hand me the statements and I'd sort them into folders logging our expenses. It was a small ritual that made me feel like we were a team, like every dollar earned and spent was ours together. But one afternoon when I asked him for the new statements to file away, he frowned, irritation flashing across his face so quickly, I almost missed it. "Don't worry about it. I'll handle them this month," he said, sliding the envelope into his briefcase. "It's just easier with the company expenses mixed in." His tone was curt, dismissive. I stood there holding a dish towel in my hand, stunned into silence. That was the first time in our marriage he'd ever shut me out of something so mundane. After that, the distance between us grew like a widening crack in a frozen lake. Dinners became silent affairs, the clink of cutlery louder than our conversations. When we sat together on the couch to watch TV, he'd scroll his phone with a faint smile on his lips, eyes darting across the screen, as if reading something private and delicious. I'd steal glances at him at the slight curve of his mouth, wondering if he was texting a colleague or someone else. At night, he began turning away from me in bed. His back felt like a stone wall between us, cold and immovable. I would lie there in the darkness, staring up at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, slow as sleep claimed him. My chest felt tight with an ache I couldn't name. One evening I found him in the backyard standing by the rose bushes I had so lovingly tended since spring. The sun had set, and a soft twilight bathed the garden in silver. He was staring across the fence at our neighbor's house, watching their little boy chase fireflies with a mason jar, his giggles rising into the night air like small bells. Thomas didn't notice me standing by the kitchen door. His face was illuminated by the porch light, and in that brief moment I saw something flicker in his eyes, a longing so raw it made my breath catch. Then just as quickly his expression hardened. He turned away from the fence back towards the dark house behind him and went inside without a word. I stood there in the doorway, my hand resting against the frame, feeling like I was watching a man I no longer knew. From the outside, people still saw us as the perfect couple. They liked our photos, dinner dates, in downtown Austin weekend getaways to wine country Thomas, with his arm around me smiling that charming smile that melted hearts so easily. Friends would comment, "Isabella, you're so lucky. He's a catch. Hold on to him tight." I would smile back, leaving little red heart emojis beneath their words. But inside, something was quietly breaking. At night, as I lay alone in our big white bed, listening to the distant hum of the highway beyond our neighborhood, a question pulsed inside my chest like a silent drumbeat. Who is Thomas Hayes when I'm not looking? And though I didn't know it yet, I was standing on the edge of a truth so dark it would swallow the world I had so carefully built. It was a Saturday evening in late spring when Thomas told me about the company party. We were having dinner, or rather I was eating alone at the dining table, while he stood by the kitchen island, scrolling his phone with that faint, distracted smile on his lips. Without looking up, he said casually, "There's a company event this weekend. You should come with me." I blinked in surprise. It had been months since he'd invited me to anything work-related. "I'd love to," I said softly, trying to keep the hopefulness out of my voice. That Saturday, I spent nearly an hour choosing what to wear. I settled on a navy blue silk dress that hugged my waist and fell in soft folds to my knees. Thomas didn't say anything when he saw me walk down the stairs, just gave a quick nod and grabbed his car keys. The venue was an upscale hotel ballroom in downtown Austin. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting golden light across tables draped in ivory linen. Soft jazz music drifted through the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Thomas transformed as soon as we walked in. He slipped effortlessly into his role, greeting colleagues with firm handshakes, laughing at their jokes, wrapping his arm around my waist in a possessive yet absent-minded gesture whenever someone looked my way. I tried to relax to enjoy the evening, but there was a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. Every time I looked at Thomas, I felt like I was seeing a man I'd never truly known. At one point, as he was deep in conversation with a group of executives, I drifted towards the bar for a glass of wine. I stood there alone, swirling the pale golden liquid in my glass, watching the bubbles rise and burst under the dim lights. That's when I heard it. Thomas's voice, low and serious, coming from just behind one of the tall potted palms near the bar. I couldn't see him clearly through the leaves, but his tone sent a chill down my spine. "The project in San Antonio is almost wrapped up. After that, I'll have more freedom." Another voice, male amused, replied, "You're really discreet about it. Did you leave any trace?" I held my breath, my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. "Don't worry," Thomas said, his voice carrying a note of quiet triumph. "Everything is under control. San Antonio." He had never mentioned any project in San Antonio. That city was over 100 miles away. Not somewhere he ever worked. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, a sickening wave of nausea rising in my throat. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it's a new client. Maybe he just forgot to tell me. But deep down in a place I had tried so hard to silence, I knew. This wasn't business. His tone wasn't professional. It was the voice he used when he thought no one was listening. Calm, confident, almost intimate. I stepped back from the bar, pressing myself against the cool mirrored wall behind me. My reflection looked pale and fragile in the dim light eyes wide with a fear I couldn't name. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Thomas found me at the bar a few minutes later, his smile bright and flawless as he slipped his arm around my shoulders. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked lightly. I forced a smile. "Yes, it's beautiful here." He kissed my temple in front of his colleagues, and I felt his lips against my skin like a brand. People around us saw a perfect couple. They saw a loving husband, a graceful wife, a life worth envying. But inside, my thoughts were spiraling. On the drive home, Thomas hummed softly under his breath, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Streetlights flashed across his face in brief golden intervals, illuminating his sharp jawline, the curve of his lips, his calm, steady eyes fixed on the road ahead. He reached over and squeezed my hand, smiling without looking at me. "I'm glad you came tonight, Bella. I've missed having you at these events." His words felt hollow, echoing in the silence of the car. I tried to hold on to them to believe them, but my chest felt tight with a dread I couldn't shake. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling long after Thomas fell asleep beside me. His breathing was slow, and even his body warm under the blanket. I wanted so badly to roll over, wake him and ask, "What were you talking about tonight? Who were you talking to?" But I didn't. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of the ceiling fan whirring above us, feeling a cold emptiness bloom in my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone, lying beside a man I no longer knew, in a house that no longer felt like home. And though I didn't yet know the details, I understood one thing with absolute, bone-deep certainty. Something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. 6. It was a gray Wednesday morning when my phone rang. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing the breakfast dishes, the soft drizzle outside streaking down the window panes like quiet tears. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the caller ID. Allison. A small smile tugged at my lips, despite the unease that had settled into my bones these past weeks. Allison and I had been friends since college. She was the kind of person who radiated energy wherever she went, tall effortlessly, stylish with a quick wit that could slice through any awkward silence. After graduation, she moved to Houston to work for a media company, but we still called each other every week, sometimes just to laugh about old memories. I pressed accept, holding the phone between my shoulder and ear as I stacked dishes on the drying rack. "Morning, stranger," I said lightly, trying to sound normal. "To what do I owe this early call?" For a moment there was silence on the other end, thick and unfamiliar. Then Allison spoke, her voice low, hesitant in a way I had never heard before, asking if I was alone right now. I froze a plate still in my hand, water dripping onto the floor, as something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I said yes, and asked what was wrong. She inhaled shakily, and through the receiver I could hear the muffled sound of traffic and a distant car horn. She said she wasn't sure if she should tell me this, that she kept thinking maybe she was mistaken, but she couldn't keep quiet. My heart began to pound as I asked her to tell me what. She said that last week she was on a business trip in San Antonio, sitting at a little cafe near the bus station waiting for a colleague, and she saw Thomas. For a moment, everything went silent around me. The world seemed to narrow down to the sound of her breathing and the rush of blood in my ears. I whispered his name, asking if she was sure it was him. She said it was him, that he was sitting at a corner table with a woman blonde younger than me, maybe in her late 20s. They were close, laughing, leaning in towards each other. It didn't look like a work meeting. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knees trembling so hard I thought I might collapse. I asked if he saw her, and she told me no, that she was too far away, and he had his back mostly turned. She said she didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it didn't feel right. She was sorry. A sharp pain bloomed in my chest, radiating outward, until my arms and legs felt numb. I sank onto one of the kitchen chairs, staring at the pattern on the tiled floor, as if it could anchor me back to reality. I thanked her softly, my voice barely audible over the roar of my pulse. She asked if I was okay, said she didn't mean to ruin my morning but couldn't keep it from me. I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay calm, telling her I was okay, that I just needed to think. She told me to call her if I needed anything. And then we hung up and the kitchen fell into silence, again broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock and the sound of rain against the window. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, her words echoing through my mind. San Antonio. Blonde woman. Laughing, leaning close. It all matched what I had heard at the company party, the project in San Antonio. The promise of more freedom once it was wrapped up. My hands shook as I reached for my cup of tea, the liquid inside rippling with the trembling of my fingers. I took a slow sip, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest as questions crowded my mind, sharp and insistent. Who is she? What is he hiding from me? Was everything these past months just a cover for something else? That night, Thomas came home later than usual. I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he took off his coat and loosened his tie. He looked tired, but there was a strange brightness in his eyes, a restless energy that sent a chill down my spine. He caught me staring and smiled, walking over to press a kiss to my cheek and murmured, "Hey, beautiful. Sorry I'm late. Long day." I nodded, feeling my throat tighten around the words I wanted to scream. Where were you? Who is she? What are you doing in San Antonio? But I said nothing. I just stood there letting him hold me, his familiar scent of cedarwood cologne filling my senses. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the man he used to be. The man who once traced hearts on my back in the darkness, who whispered dreams of the children we would have. But that night, as I lay beside him in bed, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling, a realization settled into my bones with cold certainty. Whatever life I thought we had, it was slipping away from me, one lie at a time. 3 days after Allison's call, Thomas came home early. I was in the living room folding laundry when I heard the front door open. He walked in with an energy I hadn't seen in months, a brightness in his eyes that felt almost manic. He dropped his briefcase on the sofa and told me we should get away that weekend, kneeling in front of me, with his hands resting lightly on my knees. His touch felt both familiar and foreign, as he said New Orleans, just the two of us, that he had already booked a room at a riverside hotel, and that we needed this. We needed us. For a moment, hope flared in my chest, a flicker of longing for the love we once shared. But beneath it was a cold, trembling unease. Why now? I forced a smile, folding another towel, to avoid his gaze, asking if he was sure since he'd been so busy lately. He squeezed my knees gently, his voice low and warm, telling me he was sure that he loved me. And that was all I needed to remember. That night, I lay awake while Thomas slept soundly beside me, his arm draped over my waist like a chain. The ceiling fan spun above us, its blades slicing through the shadows, as I closed my eyes, trying to silence the whisper in my mind, insisting something wasn't right. We left early Saturday morning. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow across the empty streets. Thomas was unusually quiet as he drove, his eyes fixed on the road, jaw clenched tight. Every so often he glanced in the rearview mirror, as if checking for someone following us. When I asked if everything was okay, trying to keep my voice calm, he forced a small laugh without meeting my eyes and said he was just tired, telling me not to worry. But I did. With every mile we drove, the dread in my chest grew heavier. Around midday, Thomas pulled into a small gas station off the highway in rural Louisiana. A faded sign creaked in the wind, Bayou Stop Gas. The station was old, its peeling white paint and dusty windows reflecting the glaring sun. He asked if I wanted to go in and get some water while he filled up the tank. I nodded, my throat dry, and as I opened the car door, a young man in a worn blue uniform approached. His name tag read, Ethan. He had tanned skin, tousled dark hair, and kind brown eyes that flicked briefly to Thomas before landing on me. He started pumping gas with the practiced ease of someone used to long, quiet days. Thomas stepped away to check the back tire's phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones to someone I couldn't hear. Ethan walked over to my side of the car, pretending to clean the windshield. Leaning down slightly, his eyes met mine through the glass with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. Then so swiftly I almost missed it, he slipped a small folded note through the open window gap, his hand brushing mine for a fleeting second. I stared at him, my breath caught in my chest. He shook his head slightly, his expression grave, before walking back to the pump as if nothing had happened. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper under the cover of my lap. The words inside were written hastily in block letters. "You need to get out. Right now. He's lying to you. Don't ask. Don't hesitate." My vision blurred as the world tilted and spun around me. I looked up at Ethan, who was watching Thomas with narrowed eyes. Thomas was still pacing by the pump, talking softly into his phone, his free hand gesturing with agitation. I quickly folded the note and slipped it into my pocket, just as Thomas turned back toward us, telling me lightly to go get something to drink while he finished up there. I forced my legs to move, feeling like I was walking underwater as I stepped into the small convenience store. My heart pounded so loudly, it drowned out the hum of the fluorescent lights above me. Inside, I grabbed 2 bottles of water I didn't really want, and as I turned down an empty aisle, I saw Ethan standing near the back door, gesturing subtly for me to follow. For a moment, I hesitated, my mind screaming with questions. Who was he? How did he know? What? If this was a mistake? But then I remembered the note. Don't ask. Don't hesitate. I walked over my breath, coming in shallow gasps, as he spoke quickly, his voice low but urgent. He told me he was sorry to scare me, but he couldn't stand by. 3 weeks ago, he saw my husband there with a blonde woman. They were close, talking about how this trip would take care of everything, so everything would be theirs. My mouth went dry as I asked what he meant. Ethan swallowed hard, glancing back toward the front of the store, where Thomas was still outside, phone pressed to his ear, before telling me that this morning, Thomas stopped there alone, and he heard him on the phone saying, "All the hospital admission paperwork is ready. She won't have another chance." My knees threatened to give way beneath me. Hospital admission paperwork. I thought back to the medical file I found in his briefcase days before, the one with my name and the words, "Preliminary assessment symptoms, consistent with delusional disorder." A chill ran through my body, so cold I thought I might faint. Ethan's eyes locked onto mine with fierce urgency, as he said I had to decide, right then. If I went back out there with him, I wouldn't get another chance that he could take me to the nearest police station, but we had to go now. At that moment, Thomas's voice rang out from the front of the store, sharper than I'd heard in years, calling my name. I looked into Ethan's eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and determination. My whole body trembled as I whispered for him to help me. He nodded once, firmly grabbed my wrist gently, and led me out the back door into the glaring afternoon sun behind the gas station. An old blue pickup truck was parked there, engine already running. He opened the passenger door for me with quick efficiency, telling me to get in and not look back. As I climbed in, I heard Thomas's footsteps pounding on the cracked concrete behind us. I glanced into the side mirror just as Ethan pulled away, seeing Thomas running out of the store, his face twisted in fury and panic. For the briefest moment our eyes met. There was no love in them, no confusion, no worry. Only the blazing rage of a man watching his plan unravel before him. Ethan drove fast, gravel crunching under the tires as the gas station receded into the distance. My hands clutched the note so tightly, it crumpled in my fist. Tears streamed down my cheeks, silently hot and endless. Ethan glanced at me, his voice calm despite the urgency of his driving, telling me the police station was about 30 minutes away and that I was safe. Now, he promised. I turned to look out the window as the Louisiana highway blurred past us. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. But deep down under the fragile relief, a single thought pulsed with every beat of my heart. This was only the beginning. The road stretched out before us, a ribbon of cracked asphalt, cutting through the Louisiana marshlands. Ethan drove fast, his hand steady on the wheel eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred green and gold of the summer landscape flashing past. My heart was still pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. The smell of gasoline and old leather filled the truck's cab, mingling with the faint saltiness of sweat on my skin. I could taste fear in the back of my throat, metallic and bitter. The note crumpled in my hand, edges damp with sweat. I kept reading the words over and over in my mind. You need to get out. Right now. He's lying to you. My chest felt tight lungs burning with shallow breaths. The reality of what had almost happened pressed down on me like a physical weight. I pictured Thomas's face at the gas station, twisted in rage and panic. That image burned into my mind, unshakable. Outside the window, cypress trees rose out of dark, still water, draped with Spanish moss, swaying in the humid breeze. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and distant. For a moment, I wondered if this was real, or if I was still trapped in one of those feverish nightmares where I tried to run but couldn't move. The truck bounced over a pothole. I felt every jolt through my bones, the seatbelt digging into my shoulder. Ethan didn't say a word. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed ahead, as if speaking would break the fragile thread holding this moment together. A highway sign flashed by Bayou Grove 10 miles. I gripped the door handle until my knuckles ached. Each mile felt endless, suspended in a silent, desperate prayer. My mind replayed the past weeks in flashes, Thomas's late nights, his hushed phone calls, the fake medical file, hidden in his briefcase. The realization sliced through me with cold clarity. Every touch, every whispered, I love you every night, spent tangled together in bed, all of it had been a lie carefully layered over a darker truth. Ethan turned off onto a narrow road lined with oak trees. Their shadows flickered across the windshield, dappling his face in shifting light and darkness. The truck rumbled down the gravel lane until a small brick building came into view, an American flag fluttering limply outside. The words, Bayou Grove Police Department, were painted in faded black letters above the door. He pulled up near the entrance and cut the engine. The sudden silence roared in my ears. For a moment, neither of us moved. Finally, Ethan turned to me, his brown eyes calm and steady. He didn't speak, but the silent question was there. Are you ready? I nodded. My legs trembled as I stepped down onto the warm gravel. The humid air pressed against my skin like a damp cloth. But for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. A woman in uniform stood behind the front desk, her hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp but kind. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. My voice broke before I could form a sentence. Tears welled up hot and uncontrollable. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tasting salt. The officer stepped around the counter and guided me gently to a chair. Ethan stood behind me like a silent shield. I sat there staring down at my trembling hands resting in my lap. The thin gold wedding band on my finger gleamed under the harsh lights. It felt like a shackle now binding me to a life that had almost destroyed me. I took a deep breath and raised my head, forcing myself to meet the officer's gaze. And for the first time in a long time, I spoke the truth. The small interview room smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. I sat at a metal table, fingers curled around a paper cup of water I hadn't touched. Across from me, Officer Kelly, that was her name, listened intently as I recounted everything. I told her about Thomas's late nights, his secrecy, the fake medical file with my name on it, diagnosing me with delusional disorder. I told her about the trip to New Orleans, Ethan's note at the gas station, and the words I overheard at the company party in Austin. Her expression never changed. She just nodded, jotting notes into her worn leather notebook, her pen scratching softly against the paper. When I finished, she closed the notebook and folded her hands on top of it. "At this point, ma'am, we can't arrest him based solely on suspicion. But we'll file a report immediately. I recommend you request an emergency protective order and consider hiring a lawyer and a private investigator. You need solid evidence." Her words settled into my chest like cold stones. Evidence. Proof. As if my entire life being dismantled piece by piece wasn't enough, Ethan waited outside in the small reception area. When I stepped out, his eyes met mine with quiet relief. He offered to drive me to his mother's house nearby until I could figure out my next steps. I didn't have the energy to refuse. Doris lived in a small white clapboard house with faded shutters and wind chimes that tinkled softly in the humid breeze. She welcomed me in with a warmth that made tears prick at my eyes. She brewed sweet mint tea, pressing the warm cup into my trembling hands before gently stroking my hair back from my face like a mother would. That evening, I called Allison. My voice shook as I told her everything. Silence stretched across the line before she spoke her words, firm with purpose. "I'm connecting you with someone. A private investigator I trust. His name is Nathan Brooks. I'll text you his number right now." The next morning, I met Nathan at a small diner off the highway. He was in his mid-50s with graying hair, sharp eyes, and a calm, deliberate way of speaking that steadied my spiraling thoughts. "I'll start by looking into Thomas Hayes' background. Something about this feels wrong beyond the obvious." 3 days later, he called. His voice was grave. "Isabella, I need to see you right away. I've uncovered the truth." In his office, he slid a thick folder across the desk to me. On top was a photograph. Thomas standing beside a blonde woman in front of a modest brick house, 2 young children with identical smiles clinging to their legs. "Your husband's real name is Thomas Green," Nathan said quietly. "He has a wife in Jackson, Mississippi, Amanda Green. And these are his children. They've been married for over 10 years. The room tilted around me. I clutched the edge of the desk bile rising in my throat. 10 years. That meant when Thomas and I were newlyweds, he already had another family. Another life. Nathan's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. That's not all. I obtained a warrant to access his call records. He's been working with a psychiatrist named Samuel to create a false file diagnosing you with delusional disorder. Payments were made to Samuel marked fee for file preparation. They were planning to have you committed to gain control of your assets. My vision blurred with tears I couldn't hold back. Every gentle smile, every "I love you," every promise. All of it had been a lie, a calculated performance to drain me of everything I had. Nathan rested a hand on the folder, his eyes steady. "Now's the time you need a good lawyer. I can recommend someone. We'll work together to protect you and bring him to justice." I nodded slowly, my heart shattering inside my chest, replaced by something cold and hard and resolute. Even if my past had been built on lies, I wouldn't let Thomas Green destroy what little remained of my life. Not now, not ever. After the meeting with Nathan, I didn't waste a single day. With trembling hands but a heart filled with cold determination, I called Allison again. Within an hour, she connected me to Sarah Whitman, a renowned attorney in Baton Rouge, known for handling complex marital fraud and asset theft cases. That afternoon, I sat across from Sarah in her modest office walls, lined with shelves of thick legal tomes and case files. She listened intently as I told her everything, Thomas's secret life, the forged medical records, his plan to have me committed to steal my inheritance. Her eyes darkened with resolve as she flipped through the file Nathan had compiled. "Isabella," she said quietly, "this is enough to charge him with bigamy and fraud. First, we need an emergency order to freeze all joint and individual accounts. Then we'll file criminal charges in both Louisiana and Mississippi. For the first time in weeks, I felt my lungs fill with real air. With Sarah and Nathan by my side, I signed the necessary paperwork. 2 days later, the court issued an order freezing Thomas's access to our accounts and the real estate portfolio my parents had left me. Simultaneously, Sarah filed charges in both states, exposing Thomas Green's dual identity and calculated fraud. The storm broke quickly. 3 days later, Thomas was arrested at a rental apartment near the Texas border, where he'd been hiding after realizing his plan had collapsed. Amanda Green, the woman in the photo, his legal wife in Mississippi, was also detained as an accomplice in his scheme. I still remember the first day I stepped into court. My heart pounded against my ribs as I watched him walk in handcuffed, wearing the orange jumpsuit of a prisoner. His hair was disheveled, his face pale and drawn. The confident, polished man who once stood beside me was gone. When his eyes met mine, I saw no remorse, only bitterness, rage at being exposed. Reporters lined the hallway, camera flashes flickering as Sarah and I walked past them. Their shouted questions blurred together in my ears. All I could focus on was the path ahead, the courtroom doors, the judge's bench, and the truth finally laid bare. The trial lasted 3 months. Nathan's meticulous investigation left no gaps for Thomas to escape through. The prosecution presented everything: recordings of Thomas's phone calls to Dr. Samuel, instructing him to forge my psychiatric file. Bank statements showing bribes labeled as file preparation fees. Photos of Thomas with Amanda and their children in Mississippi. Their marriage certificate proving bigamy. I sat through every day of the proceedings, my hands clenched in my lap, forcing myself to meet his gaze whenever he looked my way. I refused to bow my head in shame. He had already taken enough from me. Finally, the verdict came. Defendant Thomas Green is hereby sentenced to 7 years in prison for bigamy and asset fraud. Amanda Green is sentenced to 3 years as an accomplice. I felt tears spill down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of victory, of something like freedom. As the guards led Thomas away in handcuffs, he didn't look at me. Perhaps he finally understood that his lies couldn't last forever. In the weeks that followed, I sold the house we once shared. Every room held echoes of betrayal I couldn't bear to live among. With the remaining assets Sarah helped me protect, I moved to a small coastal town near Mobile, Alabama. A place where no one knew my name, where the ocean breeze carried away the last remnants of the life I had left behind. Each morning I sat on my porch with a cup of strong coffee, watching the sun rise over the waves, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. He hadn't destroyed me. I had survived, and from now on I would live only for myself. Life in Mobile was slow and gentle, like the rolling tides that kissed the shore each morning. My small white cottage stood on a quiet street, lined with palm trees and flowering oleanders, the sea breeze carrying the scent of salt and wild jasmine through open windows. Each dawn I woke before the sun brewed strong coffee in my chipped blue mug and stepped onto the porch to watch the first light spill across the waves. The horizon glowed in soft gold and pink, and with every breath of salty air, the tightness in my chest loosened a little more. At first, I thought I would spend these days in silence, rebuilding myself alone. But life had other plans. One afternoon, while walking through the town center, I saw a flyer taped to the library door. Its corners fluttered in the wind, the words printed in bold black ink: support group for victims of marital fraud and emotional abuse. Share and heal together. I stood there for a long time reading those words over and over. That night I lay awake thinking of women like me, trapped in fear, silenced by shame, believing they had no way out. The next morning I went to the community center. My hands trembled as I filled out the registration form. During the first meeting, my voice shook as I spoke of betrayal, of loving a man who turned my life into a carefully woven lie. But the more I shared, the lighter my heart felt. I saw my pain mirrored in the eyes of other women. Some wept, others nodded silently, gripping each other's hands with fierce understanding. In that room, my wounds began to close, not because they disappeared, but because they were finally seen. Weeks passed. From a silent participant, I became a supporter. I helped organize meetings, connected women to legal aid, sat beside them in courtrooms as they faced their fears. Every time someone whispered, "Because of you," I found the courage to leave. Warmth bloomed in my chest like dawn, breaking over dark water. Ethan kept in touch, texting every few days from New Orleans, where he finished his mechanical engineering degree. His messages were simple photos of sunsets over the Mississippi, a picture of his graduation cap tossed into the sky notes that simply said, "Hope today is a peaceful day for you." One autumn evening, he sent me a message that made me smile without realizing it. "I just graduated. Got my first job offer here in Mobile. Mom wants to invite you to dinner. She says you're family now." That evening, I drove to their small house on the edge of town. Doris greeted me with a hug that smelled of lavender and cornbread, her eyes shining with a kindness that eased something deep inside me. Dinner was simple roast chicken, steamed green beans, cornbread warm from the oven, but the table rang with gentle laughter and quiet gratitude. We talked of dreams and small joys. When Ethan spoke of his plans to design machines that could help rebuild homes after hurricanes, his eyes lit with purpose. Watching him, I felt an ache I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, relief, a quiet hope for the goodness that still existed in the world. Later that night, as I drove home along the empty coastal highway, I pulled over at a small beach access. The sand was cool under my bare feet as I walked to the water's edge. Waves whispered against the shore, the night breeze lifting strands of my hair around my face. Above me, the stars shone bright and endless. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air. The woman I had been terrified, broken, betrayed felt like a distant shadow. She had walked through fire and emerged charred but unburned. I had lost everything I thought defined me. My husband, my home, the life I built on borrowed dreams. But in that loss, I found something purer and stronger than anything I had known. Myself. From now on, I would live with open eyes and an unguarded heart. I would love without illusions, stand without fear, and carry hope for others still trapped in the dark. I understood now family isn't just blood. It's those who see your scars and choose to stand beside you anyway. The tide rolled in around my ankles, cool and sure. I tilted my head back to the stars, and for the first time in a long time, I whispered into the night with a smile. I'm free. My days are quiet here. In the mornings, I open every window to let the ocean breeze drift through the house, carrying with it the scent of salt and blooming magnolia. I keep fresh flowers on the kitchen table, sometimes wild daisies I pick by the roadside, sometimes small roses from the bush I planted outside my front porch. They remind me that beauty can bloom even from broken soil. After breakfast, I walk along the narrow path that leads to the beach. The sand is cool in the early light, littered with seashells and driftwood washed ashore overnight. I watch the waves roll in, small and gentle like the steady breathing of a sleeping child. Some days I volunteer at the library, sorting books and reading to children during afternoon story hour. Their laughter fills the quiet building, with life echoing through the high ceilings like bright little bells. I see myself in their curious eyes, the little girl I once was dreaming of, stories that could carry her away from everything she feared. In the evenings, I light a candle by the window and brew mint tea before bed. I sit at my small writing desk, recording thoughts in the leather-bound journal Allison gave me after the trial. Each page holds pieces of me, Memories, confessions, dreams I never dared to speak aloud. Writing them down feels like stitching together a tapestry of everything I've survived. Sometimes when the nights are long and the wind howls against the windows, shadows of my old life try to slip back in. Fear, betrayal, loneliness. But I breathe through them. I remind myself, that was then. This is now. Now I am a woman who knows her worth. A woman who carries her scars not as shame, but as proof she lived and survived. I still don't know what the future holds. But every morning when I stand on the shore, feeling the cool waves wash over my feet, I whisper a small prayer to the endless horizon. Let me remain strong, soft, and unbreakable. Let me always remember who I am. And as the sun rises over the water, setting the sea alight with gold, I know deep in my bones, I am free. I am enough, and I am finally home.